The Retro Football League presents The Extra Point. Powered by Wolverine Studios Draft Day Sports Pro Football. It's time to take the field. What are you bringing to the table? And now, for our host, Lance McAllister.
Good evening, football fans, and welcome to The Extra Point, the only sports show that covers the action-packed world of the Retro Football League, where the gridiron gladiators of yesteryear take the field once again. I'm your host, Lance McAllister, and tonight, we're diving right into the first week of regular season games. Buckle up, folks, because we've got a whole lot of thrilling football action to discuss. But before we dive into the games played, let's take a moment to acknowledge the loyal and passionate fans who've shown their undying devotion to the Retro Football League. Your dedication is truly remarkable. From donning the jerseys of the legends from this beloved era, to embracing the time-honored tailgate traditions, you remind us that the love for football never truly fades. Now let's jump right into the adrenaline-filled action that unfolded over the weekend. The Gridiron Warriors of the Retro Football League's Week 1 displayed their prowess, proving that even the passage of time cannot diminish their skills. Grab your popcorn and get ready as The Extra Point takes you through all the heroic feats, the jaw-dropping plays, and the nail-biting finishes of the week that was. From the crunching hits on defense to the dazzling displays of offense, we'll have it all covered here on The Extra Point. So stick around as we dive deep into the matchups, showcasing the efforts of these legendary teams and the heroes who form the backbone of the Retro Football League. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers defeated the Detroit Lions with a final score of 34-17. The Buccaneers' offense was led by quarterback Danny White, who had a solid performance, completing 12 out of 18 passes for 227 yards and 2 touchdowns. Running back Charlie Davis contributed to the team's success with 25 rushes for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns. Wide receiver Isaac Haggins was named the Offensive Player of the Game, recording 5 catches for 125 yards and 1 touchdown. The Buccaneers' defense was dominant, with defensive end Leroy Selman leading the way with 8 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. He was named the Defensive Player of the Game. Meanwhile, the Lions' offense struggled to find their rhythm, with quarterback Greg Landry completing 13 out of 15 passes for 153 yards and 1 touchdown. Running back Lawrence Gaines had a notable performance with 3 rushes for 40 yards. Linebacker Jim Leslavich led the Lions' defense with 13 tackles and 6 tackles for loss. Despite the efforts of Gaines, Leslavich, and the rest of the defense, the Lions were unable to overcome the Buccaneers' strong offensive and defensive performances. The Miami Dolphins emerged victorious over the Buffalo Bills in a close battle, winning by a score of 20-17. The game was played in challenging weather conditions, with a temperature of 65 degrees Fahrenheit and wind speeds reaching 31 miles per hour. The Dolphins got off to a strong start, scoring 13 points in the first quarter and adding another touchdown in the second quarter. Quarterback Bob Greasy had an impressive performance, completing 8 out of 12 passes for 91 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was named the Offensive Player of the Game for his contributions in both passing and rushing, gaining 4 yards on 2 rushing attempts. Running back Benny Malone also played a crucial role, rushing for 80 yards on 27 attempts. On the defensive side, defensive end Bill Stanfill had a standout game, recording 9 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and forcing a fumble. He was named the Defensive Player of the Game. The Buffalo Bills struggled to find offensive momentum throughout the game. Quarterback Glenn Carano completed 8 out of 20 passes for 89 yards and 1 touchdown. Running back Tony Nathan carried much of the rushing load, gaining 64 yards on 30 attempts. Going into the third quarter, the Bills mounted a comeback, scoring 14 points to tie the game. However, their efforts fell short as they were only able to add a field goal in the fourth quarter. Linebacker Jerry Robinson led the Bills in tackles with 9, including 1 tackle for loss and 1 sack. Despite their efforts, the Bills were unable to claim victory against the Dolphins. The Minnesota Vikings defeated the San Francisco 49ers by a score of 31-17. The Vikings had a dominant performance, particularly from their quarterback Fran Tarkenton, who threw for 134 yards and 1 touchdown, while also rushing for 101 yards and 1 touchdown. Chuck Foreman also had a strong game, rushing for 67 yards and scoring 2 touchdowns. Defensively, Fred McNeil was outstanding, recording 12 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack, and 1 forced fumble. The Vikings' balanced attack and strong defensive play led them to victory. Roger Staubach had a solid game for the 49ers, throwing for 243 yards and 2 touchdowns. However, it was not enough to overcome the strong performance of the Vikings. Otis Anderson struggled to find running room, rushing for only 55 yards on 19 carries. Greg Brazina led the 49ers' defense with 13 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. Despite Staubach's efforts, the 49ers were unable to keep pace with the Vikings' potent offense and suffered a 14-point loss. The Philadelphia Eagles emerged victorious against the New York Giants with a final score of 23-17. The Eagles' offense was led by Joe Ferguson, who threw for 172 yards and 1 touchdown. Gary Davis had a solid performance in the rushing game, gaining 48 yards on 16 carries. Defensively, Frank Lemaster stood out with 9 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 sack. Linebacker Bill Burgee also made an impact with 7 tackles, 1 interception, and 1 forced fumble. On the Giants' side, Gifford Nielsen threw for 222 yards and 2 touchdowns, but it was not enough to overcome the Eagles. Lydell Mitchell struggled to find running room, gaining just 23 yards on 12 carries, and adding 8 receiving yards. Harry Carson led the Giants' defense with 9 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. In the end, the Eagles' solid offensive performance and key defensive plays were the difference in this 6-point victory. The Houston Oilers dominated the Washington Redskins in a rainy and windy game, winning with a final score of 27-9. The Oilers' quarterback Dan Pastorini had a solid performance, completing 15 out of 26 passes for 189 yards and 2 touchdowns. Don Hardman also contributed to the Oilers' success with 64 rushing yards on just 7 carries. The Redskins struggled offensively and only managed to score 9 points, with their quarterback Joe Theismann completing 12 out of 24 passes for 97 yards and 1 touchdown. Calvin Hill had a tough game, rushing for only 1 yard on 25 carries. The Oilers' defense was led by Robert Brazil, who recorded 13 tackles and 4 tackles for loss. Tackle Art Shell was named the Offensive Player of the Game for his contributions on the offensive line, helping to pave the way for the Oilers' victory. The Atlanta Falcons defeated the New Orleans Saints with a final score of 28-13. Falcons quarterback Ron Jaworski had an efficient game, completing 16 out of 20 passes for 211 yards and 1 touchdown. Delvin Williams led the Falcons' rushing attack, gaining 88 yards on 16 carries and scoring 2 touchdowns. The Saints struggled to get their offense going, with quarterback Archie Manning completing 22 out of 31 passes for 279 yards and 1 touchdown. Chuck Muncie encountered difficulties running the ball, as he gained only 55 yards on 25 carries. The Falcons' defense was highlighted by George Atkinson, who recorded 8 tackles. Bo Rather was named the Offensive Player of the Game for his impressive performance with 6 catches for 112 yards and a touchdown. Defensive Player of the Game honors went to Mike Lewis, who recorded 2 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 sack. In a divisional matchup between the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers, the Bears came out on top with a 20-3 victory. The Bears' offense was led by quarterback Jim Hart, who threw for 188 yards and 1 touchdown. Running back Terry Metcalf had a solid performance, rushing for 105 yards on 24 carries. Defensively, the Bears were led by safety Gary Fenwick, who had 9 tackles and 1 tackle for loss. The Packers struggled on offense, as quarterback Steve Fuller threw for just 74 yards. Running back Mike Strawn had a decent game, rushing for 89 yards on 15 carries. However, it wasn't enough to overcome the Bears' dominant performance. Running back Terry Metcalf was named the Offensive Player of the Game for his impressive rushing performance. In an exciting matchup between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Dallas Cowboys, the Cardinals emerged victorious with a close 24-21 win. Quarterback Joe Montana led the Cardinals' offense with 78 passing yards and 1 touchdown. Running back Walter Payton had a fantastic game, rushing for 255 yards and 1 touchdown, while also contributing with a catch for 6 yards. Defensively, the Cardinals were led by linebacker Lucius Sanford, who had 6 tackles and 4 tackles for loss. The Cowboys put up a tough fight, with quarterback Warren Moon throwing for an impressive 304 yards and 3 touchdowns. Running back Tony Dorsett had a solid performance, rushing for 132 yards and a touchdown, while also adding 26 yards and a touchdown through the air. Despite their efforts, the Cowboys fell just short of a comeback. Running back Walter Payton was named the Offensive Player of the Game for his incredible rushing performance. The Cincinnati Bengals dominated the Denver Broncos in a 35-6 victory. Bengals quarterback Cliff Stutt had an impressive performance, throwing for 212 yards and 4 touchdowns. Running back Charlie Young contributed 110 rushing yards, averaging 4. 8 yards per carry. Linebacker Glenn Cameron was the standout defensive player with 13 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. This strong showing by the Bengals secured their win over the struggling Broncos. Another dismal performance by the Broncos resulted in a 35-6 loss to the Cincinnati Bengals. Denver's offense struggled to gain momentum, with Norman Snead only passing for 132 yards. Running back John Keyworth had a tough time running the ball, accumulating just 11 yards on 22 carries. Linebacker Bruce Elia had a solid effort on defense, leading the team with 10 tackles and 5 tackles for loss. However, it wasn't enough to compete with the Bengals' dominating performance. The New York Jets secured a 27-17 victory over the Cleveland Browns. Jets quarterback Phil Simms had a solid performance, throwing for 183 yards and 1 touchdown. Running back Haskell Stanback made a significant impact, rushing for 106 yards and scoring 1 touchdown. Linebacker Greg Buttle led the Jets' defense with 11 tackles. The Jets' strong offensive showing, coupled with their solid defensive effort, led to their win over the Browns. The Cleveland Browns fell short in a 27-17 loss to the New York Jets. Despite quarterback Brian Sipes' efforts, throwing for 102 yards, the Browns' offense struggled to gain momentum. Running back Greg Pruitt had a standout performance, rushing for 126 yards and 1 touchdown, but it wasn't enough to secure the win. Linebacker Bob Babich led the Browns' defense with 11 tackles, while their offense struggled to keep up with the Jets. The Kansas City Chiefs took on the Baltimore Colts in a close game. The Chiefs got off to a solid start with a touchdown in the first quarter but struggled to maintain momentum. The Colts, on the other hand, had a strong second quarter with 21 points, propelling them to a lead they would hold on to for the rest of the game. Despite the Chiefs' efforts to fight back with a touchdown in the fourth quarter, the Colts came out on top with a final score of 27-21. The Colts' offense dominated on the ground, with running back Ron Lee totaling 152 rushing yards and a touchdown. Meanwhile, the Chiefs' standout performer was quarterback Ken Anderson, who threw for 115 yards and a touchdown. In the end, the Colts' balanced offense and solid defensive play helped secure their victory. The Los Angeles Rams faced off against the Oakland Raiders in a low-scoring battle. Both teams struggled to get into the end zone, resulting in a scoreless first quarter. The second quarter saw both teams adding a field goal, making it a 3-3 game at halftime. In the third quarter, the Raiders were able to find the end zone and take a 10-3 lead. The Rams fought back in the fourth quarter with a touchdown of their own, tying the game at 10-10. However, the Raiders responded with another touchdown to secure a 17-10 victory. Despite the loss, Robert Miller of the Raiders was named the Offensive Player of the Game for his contributions on the ground and through the air. Defensive Player of the Game honors went to Marty Lyons of the Raiders, who made several key tackles and forced a fumble. The Seattle Seahawks dominated the San Diego Chargers, winning with a score of 23-3. The Seahawks controlled the game from the start, scoring 17 points in the first quarter and holding the Chargers to just a field goal in the first quarter. Jim Zorn was impressive for the Seahawks, throwing for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns. Sherman Smith contributed with 41 rushing yards and 1 reception for 17 yards. The Seahawks' defense was strong, with Mike Curtis leading the team with 7 tackles. Don Buterlik was named the Offensive Player of the Game for his contributions in the kicking game. The Pittsburgh Steelers defeated the New England Patriots in a high-scoring game with a final score of 24-19. Terry Bradshaw was the star of the game for the Steelers, throwing for 233 yards and 3 touchdowns. Bo Matthews contributed in the rushing game with 51 yards on 25 carries. The Steelers' defense played well, with Lauren Taves leading the team with 9 tackles and 3 tackles for loss. Dan Hampton was named the Defensive Player of the Game for his lone tackle and sack. And that wraps up another action-packed episode of The Extra Point. We hope you enjoyed diving into the thrilling world of the Retro Football League with us tonight. From the incredible tackles to the astonishing touchdowns, Week 1 surely set the stage for an unforgettable season. Before we part ways, I'd like to give a special shout-out to all you loyal fans out there. Your passion for the game and your unwavering support are what make the RFL truly special. Keep those jerseys on, keep those foam fingers high, and keep on cheering for your favorite teams because they need you now more than ever. Remember, football history doesn't stay in the past, it lives on through the spirit of the RFL. So mark your calendars and tune in next week as we bring you all the exclusive coverage and in-depth analysis of Week 2 games. You won't want to miss a single minute. Thanks for joining me tonight. I'm Lance McAllister, your host, signing off from The Extra Point. Until next time, stay safe, stay passionate, and keep loving the game of football. Good night.